We got some updates for you for the Sun Devils basketball team. There's some big changes that are coming. Let's talk about it on this edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast.
Are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. Stay in touch with that content by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast as well at LO_Sun Devils. Now, basketball. I've been trying to mix in some football talk recently, and then there was a couple bombshells that were dropped yesterday on Thursday, April 6th, and we got to talk about them. There's three big things that are going on with the Sun Devils basketball program, which includes two players declaring for the draft but maintaining eligibility, and one player who is now transferring. Let's start with the news I missed, and that is that Frankie Collins is one of the two players that is declaring for the NBA draft. I totally overlooked this, didn't even notice, and this is interesting to me. I don't know that Frankie Collins is quite ready for the pros just yet, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that he could work on and improve on. But at the same time, I feel like this is a kid who's got a lot of talent, a lot of potential, and a lot of upside to eventually get to the bigger stage. I think that he's a very quality player. He's very good defensively. He's a good distributor. He can run the court. He's smart. He's charismatic for what it's worth. Like this is a player's kind of guy. Like people gravitate to him. He's a good leader. He's got all the attributes you're looking for. He's only 6'1", so he's definitely on the shorter side, even for a guard. But the thing with Frankie is, like, I don't look at him as somebody that you're going to win games because of, like, individually. And in basketball, I think that is something that is a lot more important compared to other sports. Is like there are certain players that can will you to games and win you games individually by themselves. And those are the kind of guys that get drafted early to the NBA. And keep in mind, this isn't the NFL draft where there's 260 picks. This is 64 picks. There's only 2 rounds, or 60 picks. There's only 2 rounds. Like there's a lot less opportunity to get drafted. And I understand there's only 5 positions compared to 22 starting positions in football, but this is still interesting to me. But at the same time, I can totally understand it, because right now, Frankie Collins is in a situation where he should be thinking about his future. And this is a guy who has now played 2 years of college basketball. And typically that's about all you're going to play before you get to the pros when you're that kind of prospect. You don't want to start to get too old and play into your early 20s when you start to be viewed as an older prospect. And I know that seems very, very dumb to say, I suppose, to some people who don't view age as that big a deal. But some people will look at Frankie Collins if he is a 22 or 23-year-old rookie and take them off their boards because they're more interested in the 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. My thing with him is he just didn't really separate himself in any way at Arizona State. I feel like he was a jack of all trades and a master of none. Very, very solid defense, quality shooting, 9.7 points a game for what it's worth. Arizona State wasn't shooting a lot, and Frankie Collins wasn't one of the highest scoring guys on the team. But I feel like his shot quality was better. He was shooting 40% from the field. He was shooting almost 34% from deep. Like, he felt like a better, smarter shooter and someone who wasn't going to force it. So there's definitely qualities here to like with Frankie Collins. My thing is I don't see anything that really screams like NBA. Not yet, at least. He could get there. He absolutely could. If he were to come out next year and do some like Desmond Cambridge Jr. kind of stuff as a shooter, but more consistent, then yeah, this definitely makes more sense. But the biggest thing to remember here with a guy like Frankie Collins is that he has to think about his future now. When it comes to college basketball, like you have so many kids that are one and done, and they'll play the 1 year of college ball and they'll go to the pros and they'll get their bag and they'll move on. Like Frankie's already played 2 years of college ball, and after not getting very much opportunity in Michigan, was a very, very good starter for Arizona State. So he showed quite a bit of growth from Michigan to Arizona State. That's where I think he should come back for another year, is to continue showing that growth and to prove that he's only going to get better and better and better. But who knows? Maybe that's what an NBA team is betting on, is that the best basketball is ahead of Frankie Collins and that he's only going to continue to progress into a more professional basketball player than what he is right now. To me, Frankie Collins feels like a projection guy. And I just don't think that there's this incredibly high ceiling right now. I think this is a limited player, but I also really think that he could benefit from going back to school for at least another year. That's also maybe a little bit of selfishness, just looking at Frankie Collins and what he brought to Arizona State. Of course, I don't want to lose him, but that's the situation that we find ourselves in with Frankie Collins for the moment. He will be entering the NBA draft, but maintaining his eligibility. I want to talk to you guys about FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back into our conversation, the next player that I want to talk about is the second player that is declaring for the NBA draft. And this was more breaking news compared to Collins, who had done it earlier in the week. Warren Washington, who we've been waiting to see what his decision is going to be. He has declared for the draft and will maintain his eligibility. Now, I didn't really talk about what this meant with Frankie Collins. So let me fill you in, because I had to look into this as well. And if I still don't understand, my apologies. The NBA draft is so foreign to me compared to the NFL draft. But with a player allowing themselves to maintain their eligibility, this will allow them up until, I believe, the NBA Combine to withdraw their status and go back to college. I believe Remy Martin did this a few years ago at Arizona State and then withdrawed and then transferred to Kansas. Like, the way the NBA and the draft process works for them is a lot more forgiving, I think, compared to pro guys, where once you declare, you basically are screwed. Like you are entirely betting on yourself at this point. And if you don't get drafted as high as you think you are, bummer. The NBA is a little more forgiving with that. And that's where I can understand why Frankie Collins would do it. And it also makes sense why Warren Washington would do it. The reasons that I talked about with Frankie, talking about being an older prospect, Warren Washington has played 4 years of college basketball. He is the older prospect. And if you're not watching on YouTube, I am putting air quotes around it, because it's not like Warren Washington is a 25-year-old player. He's 22, I think. I don't got his birthday in front of me, but he's not 25. I can promise you that. And if he is, then man, that would just look really dumb. But point is, he is the older prospect that we worry about. And he never took over the game the way that some of these other huge, massive men do that play his position. But he's a very, very, very quality player. And I won't stand for people who trash talk Warren Washington, because he was one of the most important players for the Sun Devils last year. I think you can make an argument he was the most important player for the Sun Devils basketball team last year. This is a quality dude. He was shooting 56% from the floor. He was averaging just about 7 rebounds a game at 6.9, almost 2 blocks a game. a half a steal a game for what it's worth, 9.2 points a game. Like, this is a quality player. And this, of all the Sun Devils from the basketball team last year, he, to me, makes the most sense to look at his pro prospects. And this is where we've been kind of wondering, like, what's going to happen with Horne Washington, is because it does make sense for him to explore that opportunity because he is getting older. And how much more value is he going to continue to provide for himself? It feels like he's kind of plateaued. The last 3 years, 2 years at Nevada, 1 year at Arizona State, he's gone 10 points per game, 10.5 points per game, and 9.2 points per game. He shot 58%, 60.8%, and 56.3%. He pretty much is who he is. And that's a quality basketball player and somebody that you can build a roster around. Build your roster with, I should say. He's not LeBron James. That's not what I'm trying to say. This is a quality basketball player. So it makes sense for him to look at his pro prospects. Where I would tell you I want him back at Arizona State is almost entirely from a fan perspective. Because for Washington, this is, unless he is not getting drafted, unless he is flat out not getting drafted, this is a guy who should 110% be looking at the prospects of going pro, the potential to take that next step in his professional basketball career, whether that is in the NBA or maybe it's a Euro League or some other D League to eventually get to the NBA. Like, this is definitely the proper crossroads for him. Frankie Collins, he's doing the right thing. I feel like it would make more sense for him to come back, whereas with Horne Washington, it makes more sense for him to go. That's where I kind of stand with it. But obviously, as a fan, I want Horne Washington back. That's a really good basketball player for Arizona State. That was a guy who was making a difference with every minute he spent on the court. Like, you don't want to lose that, especially when you consider everything else that you've lost. And we're going to get more into the last guy that the team is losing, not to the NBA draft, in just a moment. But I do want to make sure that you guys check out the Locked On, Locked On College Basketball Podcast. My friends Isaac Shade and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court. Hear from big name experts, coaches, and players on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, available on YouTube and wherever you're getting your podcasts. Last guy I want to talk about, and this is frustrating, and we'll get into it, why I feel frustrated, but Devan Cambridge. Yep. The same guy who 2 weeks ago said he was going to come back to Arizona State will now be leaving. And I've got mixed feelings about it. It is no secret that I am pro player. And I say, if there's an opportunity for NIL, go get your bag. If there's an opportunity for you to go pro, go get your bag. There's an opportunity for you to have more playing time or more opportunities, go get your bag. But Devan Cambridge had a full-time starting role at Arizona State. He was one of the more important players for the team, averaging 9.8 points a game, shooting 50.4% from the field, 33.3% from deep. He was a good defender. He was a good rebounder with 5.4 boards a game as a guard, forward, wing kind of player for the team. He did a little bit of everything. There was a clear, defined role at Arizona State for Devan Cambridge, and there was absolutely no question that he was going to be the starter. None. But he's transferring now. And this is the frustrating aspect of it. Like, I can call a spade and tell you that as a fan, I am frustrated. This feels like Jaden Daniels again. And obviously, if it works out for him, that's all that matters. Who cares what some dude on a podcast thinks or some guy who's sitting at the end of a bar or screaming at his TV at home? Devan should not care about my opinion or anybody else's opinion. He should be worried about what's best for him. But this is just the frustrating part of being a fan, is getting invested with college athletes, because it is so easy for them to just enter the transfer portal and leave. It's so easily accessible in the best ways and also the worst ways. I just don't understand why. Like, the only thing I can really think of is if Devan is like hell bent on contending for like a championship. Because again, there's a clear defined role for him. He was a starter for 35 of the 36 games he played this year. There was no questioning whether or not he was going to be a starter for Arizona State. He was. Always was going to be. And I guess the only thing that can get my mind there is watching DJ Horne, Austin Nunez, Enoch Bache enter the transfer portal. Initially, Jemiah Neal, who came back out, and then watching his brother not have any more eligibility, and then Warren Washington and Frankie Collins declare for the draft. But keep in mind that Collins and Washington can still pull out of the draft and come back to Arizona State. In fact, I feel like that's probably going to be the case for Collins. I don't know about Washington, but I wouldn't be surprised if both of them were back at Arizona State. So I'm curious for Devan, like, is this one of those, like, you saw there were 5 starters last year and potentially all 5 of those starters are gone. Devan is watching everybody leave. Warren and Frankie go into the draft. Desmond is out of eligibility, and DJ Horne is in the transfer portal. Like, you're potentially losing your 5 starters. I can understand that. I don't know. I truly can get both sides of it. It's just, as a fan, this stinks. And it's tough to watch. And this burns even more because Arizona State has already had to deal with somebody saying they're going to come back, and then they just transfer a few weeks later. Like, we got burned when Jaden did that. And fans are still upset about that. I'm still a little rough about it. I think I've come to terms with it. I was absolutely salty for the 2022 season. There's no doubt about that. I was a salty fan. I think I've come to terms with it. With Devan, that would just really stink to have a guy who was like, yeah, you know what? I'm coming back. And then to just back out of that. Like, we can totally go down a whole different path with that I'm not going to. Like, that's its own thing, its own conversation that you can have, I suppose. But the bottom line is, this is just the nature of the transfer portal. This is the nature of college sports in 2023. Like, the transfer portal's there for better or for worse. Arizona State's just going to have to attack it again, and they've already gotten off to a good start with the kid they brought in, Malachi, name I can't remember, and I just can't remember his name. But I trust that Arizona State will be able to reload. They did it last year. I'm sure they can do it again. It just stinks that you had the guy who was committed and then went back on his word. But it is what it is. Like I said, end of the day, pro player. Devan, do what you got to do. Don't worry about the opinions of anyone else. Whatever's best for your pro prospects, whatever's best for your wallet, whatever's best for you personally, go do it. Bottom line. That's all I got for you guys. That is the biggest news right now for Arizona State Sun Devils basketball. We could be looking at 5 brand new starters, and I will be going through that next week. I don't know if that'll be a Monday episode or maybe middle of the week, but I will be making my predictions for the starting 5 for Arizona State in 2023-24. We'll also be recapping this weekend's spring practice. This is the last Saturday practice before we have the spring football game next Saturday. So to stay in touch with everything that's going on with the Sun Devils, wherever you're getting your podcast, make sure that you hit like and subscribe to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast and turn on those notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. Stay in touch with that content by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. Till next time, though, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.